In 1775, Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet stating that the freedoms of man can only be maintained by limiting the power of government. The pamphlet was called Common Sense. In 2015, it still is Common Sense.
I'm Elizabeth Smith, and this is Common Sense. Mark Sicario will rejoin us next week. Today, Representative Pat Morgan interviews Representative Anthony Giarrusso, and they discuss raising the minimum wage in Rhode Island. We'll also check in with Jeffrey Shard as he discusses volunteering, or the lack thereof, and also ask the perpetual burning question, are you kidding me? Now for analysis of this week's top stories. Chafee announced his run for president this past week and adds himself to tomato cans all lined up for Hillary. This, according to Brian Giarrusso of Go Local Prof. He says, there are few guarantees in politics, but there's one thing to bet on. Hillary Clinton is going to be the Democratic nominee for president. The only question is if the primary bolsters her national image by making her look moderate compared to her opponents, or if it damages her by calling attention to her weaknesses. As a Republican, I hope for the latter, but fear the former is more likely, especially if Bernie Sanders emerges as her main primary foe. Hillary opponents are a collection of has-beens and never-will-be's. Bernie Sanders, Martin O'Malley, Jim Webb, and Rhode Island's own Lincoln Chafee are the political equivalent of tomato cans in boxing. Chew on that for a second. That's the term for the weak opponents promoters use to inflate an up-and-coming fighter's win total, and it applies to Clinton's hapless foes. Giarrusso goes on to say that right now Vermont Socialist Senator Bernie Sanders is the most popular of the Clinton alternatives, a dubious honor that means he's supported by just 15% of Democrats, only 42 points behind Hillary. Chafee's problems are well known to Rhode Islanders who suffered through his gubernatorial tenure. His arrogant demeanor and cringe-inducing struggles with public speaking will be as unpopular in Iowa as they were in Rhode Island. Retail politics are essential for insurgent candidates in early primary states, so Chafee's disdain for glad-handing and backslapping will make it hard for him to rise above the 1% they're currently receiving in the polls. To this I say, well, somebody's got to be her court jester. And now we'll check in at the State House with Republican House and Senate caucuses.
Common Sense TV here with Senator Minority Whip Nick Kettle, who recently had some success on a Senate bill. Senator, could you please tell us about that bill and its purpose?
Yes, I have introduced for the third year in a row a bill to allow direct deposit for people who file by paper their income tax returns. Currently you can get it electronically, but this is to mirror the federal process with the state process. There's no fiscal impact, and it just allows much faster time, and hopefully will save money and streamline government for taxpayers.
I understand this also may be a prevention for mail fraud like we've heard recently?
Yes, yeah, absolutely possible, and it's a much cleaner process just to allow direct deposit, and people get their money faster.
Common Sense TV here with Representative Anthony Giarrusso recently put in a House Bill 6015, and we understand it's going before the House Finance tomorrow. Could you tell us a little bit more about that bill?
Yes, it's just any quasi-public entity that we pay for has to be in a line item, in an appropriation line item in the budget, instead of it just being lumped into a lump sum that people don't really know what it's going for. So if you appropriate it and you detail exactly what it is and what the expenditure is all about, it's more transparent. You know, there's been times where we have a quasi-public, take for example the Convention Center Authority. We could be appropriating $25 million for that entity, and it's just swept into a big lump sum. But now this bill will make it an appropriation to detail it in the budget so everyone knows what they're voting on.
Common Sense TV here again with Senator Minority Whip Nick Kettle, who recently put in Senate Bill 125 before the Senate Judiciary. Senator Kettle, could you tell us the purpose of that bill?
Yes, this bill is to investigate who, what, and who knew what when with 38 studios. Basically, this is the ongoing scandal, and each year we have to pay $12.5 million approximately due to the loan not going through with the famous video game company. And this was the legislation that Dawson Hodgson put in last year in the Senate, and I've kind of taken up the reins and am continuing to push for a full investigation before we, the taxpayers, shell out any more money to this bondholders.
Do you see any success in the future with this bill?
Unfortunately, people don't seem to want to uncover or really want to figure out what happened. I do, and I think the people do that are going to be paying for this, and it's unfortunate.
Is it too strong to say Rhode Island pension reform is a three-ring circus? As General Treasurer of the Ocean State, Gina Raimondo saw the looming pension crisis coming. It started simply enough and well before her tenure as treasurer. Once legislators began balancing their annual state budgets by not allocating new principal to the fund, the clock was ticking. Unless increasingly greater acts of sleight of hand could be performed with the returns on existing principal, the regular payments to state retirees would soon drain the pool of money. Treasurer Raimondo realized she couldn't make the General Assembly pony up more capital. She also got it that forecasting 7% and 8% returns on existing investments was unrealistic in an era of 0% interest rates from the Fed. So she floated a plan to make small decreases in the fund expenditures and strong-arm lawmakers to get it all passed. No cuts in benefits to public sector unions can be accepted without a fight, of course. So highly paid leadership of these powers behind the political throne immediately sued. What followed was a slow-motion civics lesson, wherein Superior Court Judge Sarah Taft Carter explained to the unions that laws duly passed by the legislative branch could only be challenged on constitutional grounds. Not liking the new law wasn't good enough, so the plaintiffs took a new tack. They suggested a settlement of the lawsuit. Any other state government would have laughed at such an offer from a plaintiff, certain to lose. But this is Rhode Island, and by the time of that Hail Mary offer, Miss Raimondo was our new governor. She needed political peace and quiet more than she needed a quarter measure to begin dealing with her underfunded pension account. So the unions are now in the process of getting a partial rollback on the tiny correction that started the whole show. Now comes a private citizen named William J. Murphy. He is no relation to the former speaker of the same name. This Bill Murphy is seeking standing with Judge Taft Carter's court to argue that by giving money we don't have back to state employees who have no legal claim to it, he is being hurt. The damage comes through the inevitability higher taxes will have to pay to fund that settlement. Good point. Maybe that's why he is being ignored. That's what we have, folks. It's a parade of clown cars circling the distraction of a lawsuit which should have never been filed. And all this really does is distract us from the shambles of what's been made of our public finances. It's little wonder we're in the state that we're in. Well, it's more of the same political shell game. According to Brandon Bell, chairman of the Rhode Island GOP, when former Governor Lincoln Chafee decided not to seek re-election, Rhode Islanders looked forward to new leadership. 5 months into the governorship of Gina Raimondo, Rhode Islanders are scratching their heads again, wondering if anything has really changed. The Rhode Island Republican Party chairman, Brandon Bell, points out the following. Governor Lincoln Chafee's solutions to Rhode Island's problems including expanding the sales tax and putting a new toll on the Secana Bridge. Governor Gina Raimondo's solutions include a new statewide property tax, a new tax on health care insurance bought by all individuals and small businesses to pay for Rhode Island's Obamacare exchange, which costs more to operate than the DMV. Now Governor Raimondo wants new tolls on about 24 bridges. So much for Raimondo's campaign pledge that we're not going to tax our way out of our problems. Chairman Bell further states, what's even worse is Governor Raimondo has sprung this new vague toll proposal at the very end of the legislative session. No one is sure how much the toll is, which bridges will have a toll, and who will actually be tolled. It's not even clear Raimondo knows or understands the details of her own plan. In a recent WPRI 12 interview, she indicated that her tolls would only impact the biggest trucks. Well, yesterday, immediately before a House hearing, she changed her proposal to exempt some classes of trucks from these tolls. This total confusion is something we expected from Lincoln Chafee. Now we need to expect this from Governor Raimondo. Unfortunately, it looks like 4 more years of total confusion for Rhode Islanders, unquote. In conclusion, I give you a math equation. Chafee plus Fox equals Raimondo plus Mattiello. Simply put, a lateral move and more of the same. And that's it for news analysis. And now Pat Morgan speaks with Anthony Giarrusso. But first, are you kidding me? The Rhode Island state representatives may be generally in favor of free trade until it's one of their constituents who stands to benefit from restricted trade. Are you kidding me? Here's a case in point. Representative Lombardi entered legislation which became House Bill 5029, specifically prohibiting the sale of hearing aids in the Ocean State. Except by a practitioner licensed to fit the devices, and then only after a face-to-face meeting. Why is that restraint of trade? Because some of us might want to try the 1995 As Seen on TV special. Because in today's technological environment, the power and miniaturization of electronics definitely means that the weight and size considerations, which once determined what would work for you, are now history. But it's mostly because the only apparent justification for this bill is that it protects the high-priced traditional offerings in this product class. Isn't it more important that regular Rhode Islanders have their freedom to choose for themselves a broad range of options? Representative Lombardi, are you listening? Can you hear us? Are you kidding me?
What do I stand for? What do I stand for? Most nights I don't know anymore.
Hello, welcome to Common Sense. This is a program where we try to make sense out of the policies that affect your lives and come up with common sense solutions. And today I have two guests, and we're going to be talking about the minimum wage. We have Doug Ouimette, who is owner of a small store in the fast food industry, and Representative Anthony Giarrusso, who owns a small manufacturing company here in Rhode Island. Welcome.
Well, good morning. Thanks for having us.
Glad you could come. As you know, this week we actually passed an increase in the minimum wage. And those of us who spoke against raising it are being painted as being hard-hearted and not caring about the poor and not trying to give people enough money in their lives that they can escape poverty. So we're being painted, I think, in a kind of a bad light. And yet for me, I've done the research. I've gone to the economic theories. And for me, raising the minimum wage is actually about the drag that it puts on our economy and the fact that it stops us from creating jobs. I think more than anything in Rhode Island, we need job creation. We need to put people to work. And full-time work. And that's why I think that raising the minimum wage is hurting Rhode Island. But you two are actually in business. Yep. So let's talk from your point of view as business owners. How is the minimum wage affecting you? And I guess who would like to go first? Anthony?
Sure. Well, the problem with minimum wage, what we keep doing on Smith Street every year I've been there anyway, it's counterintuitive. We make it seem like it's all rosy and it's nice and we're going to give everybody an extra 25, 35, 50, or in this case 60 cents an hour. But what you're doing is you're promoting importing and automation. Every time the minimum wage goes up, and I don't think that we should not have a minimum wage, we should, but we shouldn't be increasing it as quickly as we have been over the past few years. But it's evident. Just go to any supermarket, and most of the lines they're checking out are automatic checkout. When's the last time anybody saw a full-service gas station in a state that's not New Jersey because theirs is legislated? That's what you have to do. And business people, all the business people do is they take a number and what is it costing for this product or service, and they pass it on to the customer. So eventually, that's what has to happen. If you know that your payroll used to be X, Y, and Z, and now you have to add another 20% or 30%, ultimately it does go down to the consumer.
Okay. And what about you, Doug? How is it affecting you?
Well, in the fast food industry, I know over the last 5 or 6 years, the gross income has either remained the same or it actually has gone down 3 or 4%. So we have our fixed costs, which...
So people just aren't going out to eat as much?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And the fixed costs like food, utilities, rent constantly go up. The only control I have over how my business succeeds is labor costs. That's the only thing I can control. I can't really reduce employees. I can't do a lot of things maybe businesses that aren't in the fast food industry can do. But it's the last thing that I feel is going to come off of what I call the net profit, which isn't a lot in the fast food industry, but each year when the raise goes up, another $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 comes off right out of the owner's pocket. So it gets to a point where you want to say, why do I stay in business? And then if I'm able to, the ability or what the business is worth for resale is just cut in half. And then when it gets to a point where, say, you're making $50,000, nobody wants to buy a $50,000 job. So the business literally, possibly, to almost everyone becomes worth nothing.
Or goes out of business.
Or it just goes
Closes.
out of business,
Yeah.
correct.
You had mentioned, Anthony, that when the price of your employees goes up, so price of materials is going up, price of electric is going up, water is going up, insurance is going up. Kind of everything that you need to run your business has been increasing in cost.
Yes.
And now your employees are also increasing in cost.
Yes.
So you had mentioned, and I'm thinking you're telling me that you can't, but you said that the employer then just tries to pass the cost on to the customers.
So, yeah, there's some businesses that
Is that a
can't.
point where you can't?
Because it becomes, you're starting to compete. In my situation, where I'm in the jewelry manufacturing business and distribution, what happens is that my customer will say, I'm only going to pay so much for that bracelet. And if you can't give it to me for that, then I'm going to go to XYZ that imports it. And now what does that do? Now you're actually losing employees. And the other thing
you're not selling as much because people won't buy it at the higher price.
Right. And the other thing that always seems to go unnoticed is what the effect of minimum wage increases do on youth. You know, youth unemployment, I'm sure it skyrockets every time the minimum wage goes up. Because as you get to a number that is a sustainable price or wage for a certain job, you're getting to the point where do you hire a 16-year-old that is just starting and you got to worry about them texting and Facebooking and tweeting and all that stuff? Or do you get somebody who's 29 or 30 years old for around the same price? That's why teen unemployment is through the roof.
Yeah. So I assume if they're texting, they're going to get tomatoes on their screen.
We have a very strict rule about texting. In fact, it's amazing. Probably the #1 reason I do let somebody go is texting. When that cell phone's on, that's where their brain is. Even if it's not on them, they want to know what's on the text.
Right.
They truly believe they're more important than they are. I don't know.
All right, but let's get back to passing the cost on. Can't you just raise the cost of the food that you're selling?
It's a fact, and I could say research shows, but it's just common sense also, that when you raise the cost of something, the customer count drops drastically. So you got two avenues. You can raise the cost and hope you get enough customers to create a profit, or you can lower the cost and help to increase the customer count and have a very small margin. Either way, there's no way to make more money. At least in the fast food industry, there is not. It's a very obvious situation where...
so you have more volume but less profit, so you're making the same amount of money.
You're making the same amount of money.
For more work.
Yes, yes. And when you do reduce the cost of a product, you're selling more of them. So what do you have to do? You have to hire another person. You're selling X amount of...
And you can't do that because you have to pay them too much.
You can't do that.
Yeah.
So now the lines a mile, oh, it's just, no, there is not anything you can really do to fight the increased cost of, minimum wage.
All right, so if you can't increase the cost of the product, so your customers really won't buy it at a higher price, or it tops out at a certain level, then what are your options? Your options are to work with fewer people, give more part-time work. What are your options?
Well, business, unlike politics, is you can't, in politics you see what's happening all the time. You can't make your budgets work, so you increase fees, you increase taxes, and it is what it is. In business, you can't do that. You can only charge as much as your customer is willing to pay, or they'll go somewhere else. So, more often than not, you have to make a decision. Can I make it with fewer employees? And now, what does that do? Now
somebody is losing their job.
Someone's losing their job, and
not good for them.
Right, exactly.
Right. In mine, I can't make it with fewer employees, so they get less hours.
Fewer hours.
Fewer hours.
Okay, and we're going to talk about that effect on employees in our next segment. But right now, we're going to do Are You Kidding Me?
Newsflash. The Rhode Island House thinks contributions from lobbyists corrupt the legislative process, so it only accepts them on weekends. Are you kidding me? Well, the fix under consideration is a little more restrictive than that. It's only while on vacation. House Bill 5032 proposes to outlaw any political contributions from any registered lobbyist while the General Assembly is in session. If that sounds good to you, think again. The bill, sponsored by Representative Lombardi, still leaves plenty of time for regular contributions, which would be legally made between July 2nd and December 31st of any year. Does the House really feel that lobbyist contributions are a corrupting influence on the decision-making process of otherwise totally unbiased lawmakers? If so, then go for the gold! Prohibit such contributions altogether. Limits on campaign contributions in Rhode Island are among the smallest in the nation. If the House is going to make the argument that its members are all adults and can differentiate between sincere contributions and contrived attempts to buy influence, then leave things as they are. Half measures, such as this one, make the chamber just look silly. A six-month loophole every year for an otherwise prohibited act. Are you kidding me?
We're here today talking about the minimum wage with Doug Ouimette, who is an owner of a small store in the fast food industry, and with Representative Anthony Giarrusso, who owns a small manufacturing company in Johnston, jewelry. And we were talking kind of about the effects of raising the minimum wage on small businesses, the number of employees you have. But let's talk about its effect on the workers and on the poor, because one of the real arguments that has been advanced by the proponents of raising the minimum wage is that we need a living wage, that poor families can't make it on $9 an hour or $9.60 an hour is what it is now. So let's just talk about that a little bit. Anthony, I know you heard a lot of this testimony because you're on the House Labor Committee. What is your answer to that? I don't think people can raise a family on $9.60 an hour.
So the operative word that you used was a living wage, and the minimum wage has never been designed to be a living wage. It's to get someone to cut their teeth on, this is your job. This is what a job is. This is what a commitment is. You get in there, you have to start at a certain time, and you have a boss and you have accountability, and it's just to enter the workplace. You cannot be raising your family on minimum wage. Otherwise, minimum wage would be $30 an hour. That's not what it's designed to do.
Okay, and Doug, I mean, tell me about the demographics of of your store, do you have a lot of people who are raising their families on the employment that you give them?
No, the majority of my employees are, say, 16 to 18 years old. They're high school students. And you try to find somebody, like he had said, you know, above the minimum wage average age level to maybe take a supervisory kind of position to get a little more
But they
responsibility.
come in at minimum wage and then they get the skills?
Correct, correct. And then when they produce and their productivity warrants it, you give them some more money. And they're the ones that are the primary reasons for you to succeed. So when you bring those people in and you give them a little more money or as much money as you can, when the minimum wage goes up, well, then it kind of steamrolls. I mean, so now, you know, in the fast food industry, there isn't a huge difference. It's not like it's $8 and $30. It's $9 and $10. So when you go from 8 to 9, your 9 has to go to 10 because they're just, the only productive person you have now kind of starts to become unproductive.
Sure, their morale sinks if they're not getting a raise too. Exactly.
And work ethic is work ethic. You have a high school student, now mind you, he's putting in, I don't know, is it 40 hours a week in high school? So he's kind of tired to begin with, and you take that into consideration, and there's a place for them. But it certainly isn't at $9 and $10 an hour, I don't believe. And they do what they do. Work ethic is work ethic. And so now it's steamroll. So the $9 person gets 10, the $10 person gets 11. When it goes to $9.60, and it just steamrolls. And again, I think I mentioned before, the only control cost I have is labor.
Yeah, but I guess you're hiring high school students.
Correct.
They come in, they learn how to be cooperative, how to work with other people, how to serve customers.
Correct.
They understand how businesses work. So they develop skills. Even though it's fast food, they're developing skills. Now in your company, I imagine they learn even higher level skills. So if you find employees, I know you don't hire anybody at minimum wage, you bring them in at higher than that, but still, if you find employees that are very motivated, that they're particularly mechanical, or maybe they're more creative, you can find ways to promote them and get them into higher jobs.
Yeah, it happens all the time in my business, because I'm a firm believer that I always would prefer to promote from within. You know, there have been times where we had to go outside of our organization to fill critical roles, but 99% of the time, it's from somebody that, exactly what you just said, they come in, you know, as you said,
They start low.
They start low because it's not a high-skilled job, but you can see how motivated they are, and they just can't do enough for you. And as a result, that's the person that you think about when you need a manager or a supervisor or something to run a department.
Sure, those are the skills you're looking for in employees.
The person that comes in when somebody calls out, you know you can call them and they'll come in, you know, on their off day. Those are the people who need to be...
Who get the raises.
Correct.
And the more responsibility.
Responsibility gets raises. I actually have employees who thinks raises will create responsibility. Work ethic is work ethic.
I had someone compare minimum wage to being in school. When you start kindergarten, you come in with no skills.
Correct.
But as you're there and you learn how to learn, right?
Yep.
You get more skills. You go up the scale, right? And eventually you've got a lot of skills. And then, well, now the school analogy stops working very well. But it's minimum wages for people who are coming out of high school, or it's their first job.
Right.
They come in and they learn and they get skills, and those skills make them more valuable. And people are willing to pay for those skills ultimately.
Well,
employers are.
Any job when you're 16 years old is critical, not only so you can learn what you like and how good you are, it also teaches you what you don't like. Like, my God, do I really want to do this the rest of my life? So I better go into another direction.
Or I better go back to school.
I better study hard, and I don't want to be this person. So there's many reasons why it's critical that we do whatever we can to make sure a 16-year-old can get a job.
I know that my grandparents are from Poland, and they came to the United States with no skills. They had been living on farms. They didn't even speak the language, so they came with very few skills. And at that point, getting into a manufacturing job, entry level, was their entree, or the way that they got into the American dream, right? They ended up owning a home and having a family and cars in the driveway and that kind of stuff. But it was entry level, no skills. And as they got into that no skill job, then they learned, and they were able to get raises and then actually move from one job to another, because now they had abilities that they didn't have. One of the things that I see here in Rhode Island is, if we had plentiful jobs, right, we'd be paying more even for the entry level. The problem is we don't have plentiful jobs like they did when my grandparents came over here. So even the immigrants coming, they can't find even the entry level jobs to come in to learn those skills. So the American dream is getting shut off for a lot of people, but the minimum wage isn't going to get them there, raising the minimum wage, because it pulls down on the number of jobs. It's kind of this vicious cycle that we have.
You know, you make a really good point, as usual, of course, that businesses know so much more than politicians do. You know, we know that there's a supply and demand factor. You know, we study economics. We know all that stuff. So what's better than having the market dictate the rates? I remember I started my business in 1986, and we had a robust economy. We had, really, it was probably like a net zero unemployment at that time. So you couldn't pay minimum wage. Nobody could pay minimum wage at that time, because there were so many people. There were more jobs than we had people to fill those jobs. That's how you create minimum wage. We should definitely concentrate more on making it more business friendly. Keep people here, keep jobs here, get jobs here.
Making it easier for companies to grow jobs instead of making it harder for them.
I'm really jealous when I read the papers and I see that a state like South Carolina just landed a contract with Volvo, multi-million square foot facility with 4,000 jobs. What would 4,000 jobs do to Rhode Island? Yeah. It would solve all our problems.
Sure
so
would.
I'm jealous. Guilty as charged.
Okay, so we're going to stop right there, and we're going to come back with some more discussion. But first, we're going to have a segment on Are You Kidding Me?
Are you kidding me?
Are you kidding me?
Oh, hello there, Governor. What the hell just happened? Chafee rolled out his platform for his campaign this week. His two major campaign initiatives are sure to sit well with the 1% of voters he's got in his corner right now. Here at Common Sense, we've created some suggested campaign zingers for 2016. Our first top 10 list. Number 10, bidets in every home, paid for by the toilet paper tolls. You're up peeing now. Number 9, we'll build empty parking garages all over the country next to rail lines that no one needs. Number 8, let's replace the NFL with every American's cure for insomnia, soccer. Number 7, gee, I think I'll call every tree a holiday tree, and don't you dare cross me. Number 6, we'll secretly change the electrical sockets in everyone's home to Shuto plugs and watch the fun. Number 5, free Obama phones, except we'll call them chafe phones. Number 4, supersize the tax rates on hair salons all over America and call every day super duper vanity days. Number 3, free house for those who build them with Lincoln logs. Number 2, teach ISIS you can't sing Kumbaya without your head. And the number 1 campaign zinger, metrics lesson number 1, Celsius learned in Canada. It doesn't take long to realize that 34 degrees is hot. Oh, Chafee for president. It's going to be a long campaign season. Are you kidding me?
Welcome back. Today we're talking about the minimum wage with 2 guests, Doug Ouimette, who is the owner of a fast food store, and Anthony Giarrusso, Representative Anthony Giarrusso, who owns a small jewelry manufacturer here in Rhode Island. Gentlemen, I just wanted to wrap up kind of our last segment, because constantly those of us who are saying let's slow down on raising the minimum wage, we're accused of not wanting to help poor families, which is absolutely the opposite of how I feel. And one of the things, and you alluded to it, Doug, is that if your costs are going up, but you can't increase the price of your product because people won't pay for it, then the only thing you can control is employee costs.
Correct.
If the minimum wage goes up, the only thing you can really do is give them more or less hours.
Correct.
So you're going to cut hours.
Yep.
I actually did some research for this. I went to some economic textbooks and white papers, and they said actually the thing that helps poor families the most is not an increase in the minimum wage, but it is in an increase in the number of hours they work. And the way that you get more hours is by having a thriving economy and plenty of jobs. Right? Plenty of customers coming in the door so that you can make the money, and then you can increase the hours. Plenty of customers to buy your jewelry, because then you need to make more of it. It's flying off the shelves, right? You had mentioned to me that if you were able to make more money, you'd actually open up another store.
Right. In fact, that was my intention, originally, was to have 3 stores. And the one we started about 5 years ago, just due to the economy, and I mean, we tried everything, just wasn't able to make it. So we had to sell it to a wonderful couple who wanted to put in 120 hours a week, and that's just something, and they like it, and they're in business for themselves.
But they're working; they're not hiring employees.
No, that's see now when a store gets to a point, what is it worth? Well, it's not only what is it worth; it's that who wants to buy it. It really lowers the types of folks that you can sell it to. So my intent was to create 30 jobs, but now I have 10, and that's going on just about everywhere.
Yeah, fewer jobs are being created.
Correct.
It's no mystery to me that minimum wage becomes a real issue when an economy is stagnant and jobs aren't being created. I remember, maybe back in 2005 or 6, seeing McDonald's with signs out in front of the McDonald's stores begging people to come in and paying more than minimum wage.
Yep.
Because there were so many jobs out there, they couldn't find people to work. Now it's just the opposite.
Yep.
There's way too many people who need jobs and not enough jobs. And that comes to the conversation of supply and demand.
My favorite subject.
Your favorite subject.
Economics.
All right, so you wanted, that's right. Businessmen have to be aware of the economy and economic principles, whether you think of it that way or not. So tell us about supply and demand.
Well, although I was never really quite a nerd in school, I really did like economics. I mean, I was that guy. I liked economics.
You like that.
But really, a perfect case in point right now is North Dakota. I had mentioned South Carolina before. They have their thing, and they're a really good business-friendly state, and so is North Dakota.
They're making jobs. They are growing jobs.
People are moving to North Dakota. I mean, everyone always has this conception that we're going to be moving to Florida because it's great weather. But I've been to North Dakota, and I can't think of any place that has worse weather than North Dakota.
Pretty cold in the winter, I imagine.
It sure is. It's so North Dakota right now, just to put a perfect analogy here, people in Rhode Island that work as cashiers at, say, Walmart, for example, are making minimum wage upwards of maybe $10 an hour. North Dakota starts out at close to $18 an hour. And why is that? Because that's all they can't get them for $10 an hour because there's such a great jobs environment there. And that's what I was saying in the last segment. We should be concentrating more from a political standpoint on what can we do to get more jobs. Because the job is the best social program.
Making the jobs climate here welcoming to companies.
Right.
And so they grow jobs.
And the minimum wage, whatever that may be, will be a moot point because companies will have to pay substantially more just to get people, to attract them to work for their firms.
So they're paying a lot more than the minimum wage in North Dakota, my understanding is $7.25. So they're paying more than double just to be a cashier at Walmart.
Exactly.
So I can imagine that skilled jobs are paying even much, much more than that.
Absolutely. And that's the only way you can attract someone to the frozen tundra that's up there in North Dakota.
But they have plenty of jobs.
Yes.
So people who go there are finding the jobs too. That's a way to come out, get out of poverty.
Absolutely.
Go to North Dakota. Don't stay here in Rhode Island, I guess.
And you don't need sunscreen either.
Right. That is something that I think when we're making decisions down in the State House, we're forgetting, is that it's about creating an environment here that grows jobs, right? And you were talking to me earlier about some of the challenges that you have. There's just so many fixed costs, is what you call them. Anthony, I know you have them too. Every businessman in Rhode Island has these fixed costs. And instead of raising the minimum wage, it appears to me we would be better off trying to lower those fixed costs on companies. There's a company out in Cranston that I know is leaving Rhode Island. They're shutting down. It's a Honeywell factory, all right? Great global company. 300 jobs out there. 300 families getting a living wage from this company. All levels, so entry level, all the way up to executive level. And they are leaving Rhode Island. Now, I can't say that it was necessarily because they knew that the minimum wage was going up, but that's one more burden on them. Electric rates. We know that manufacturers use a ton of electric. I imagine you too, right? Just keeping the lights on 24 hours and your ovens and all those kinds of stuff. Air conditioning costs a lot of money for companies in electric. You have commercial tax rates that are usually, or many times, double what it is for residential. You have insurance rates. You have an onerous, actually, legal environment here. It's very, very hard on companies. Workman's comp. What other costs that you have? I mean, we can just. I've heard small businessmen describe Rhode Island as being hostile, a hostile environment for businessmen. That they just want to think of you as the bad guys instead of the good guys who are providing jobs. But Honeywell is leaving. Those 300 families are without that company giving them a regular paycheck now. And they're going to Mexico. Now in Mexico, the hourly wage is $1.50 to $2 an hour. Hard to compete globally if we keep raising our minimum wage, right? We know we've lost the textile industry, we've lost a lot of the jewelry industry, we've lost so many companies out there because we're competing globally now. I don't know, Anthony, have you seen that in your industry?
Absolutely. We had I always like to talk about jobs, what manufacturing jobs mean. And I know this has nothing to do with the minimum wage, but what a manufacturing job does is it supports other jobs. And there's mom and pop shops that do different things when it pertains to jewelry. And back in 1991, when we had the first Gulf War, it always spurs patriotism, these types of things. So we had a big run on flags and red, white, and blue. We couldn't do enough of them, so we farmed them out. And there's so many businesses around us that could take our overload. And then in fast forward that to 10 years into 2001, when we had the attack, another wave of patriotism, probably the biggest in U.S. history. We had a much more difficult time, and that's only in 10 years, to get those supporting businesses around us to help to offset our manufacturing needs. And if that would have happened today,
because they just weren't there anymore.
They weren't there. Half of them were already gone. And now, now we go into 2015. If it happened again today, we wouldn't be able to do it. There are no more businesses out there. There might be one or two. They could never fulfill the demand. We'd have to go to China.
So the issue seems to be more about our jobs climate than about the minimum wage.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're going to stop right now. We'll be right back.
Hello, welcome to Common Sense.
This is a program where we try to make sense out of the policies that affect your life.
Common Sense is on each week on Verizon Channel 34 or Cox Channel 15, Saturdays at 4 p.m., Sundays at 10 a.m. You can also find us online at www.commonsenseri.org. Join our host, Representative Patricia Morgan, each week as she brings you a variety of experts from the financial or small business community, government policy experts, town councilors, and members of our state General Assembly to discuss the issues that affect your life. We review the news of the week from our own perspective with Elizabeth Smith and Luis Vargas. We hear from Jeff Richard, who always brings us some interesting insight, and where we always ask the question, are you kidding me? So remember to join us on Verizon Channel 34 or Cox Channel 15, Saturdays at 4 p.m. and Sundays at 10 a.m., or online at www.commonsenseri.org, on Facebook and our YouTube channel, Common Sense, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter at CommonSenseRI.
Welcome back. We're here today discussing the minimum wage, the economic impacts of the minimum wage, with two guests, Doug Ouimette, who owns a fast food restaurant, and Representative Anthony Giarrusso, who owns a small jewelry company and also is on the House Labor Committee, which actually heard the testimony. So he really got a thorough education in both sides of the issue. Anthony, since 2013, the unemployment or the minimum wage has gone up 24%. So in about 4 years, it's gone up 24%. I know from being in private industry that if I was just a skilled person working in a company, I'd be lucky if mine had gone up a third of that, maybe 7 or 8% if I got regular raises. How can we justify raising the minimum wage? What are the arguments for raising it 3 times more than an average employee would have gotten?
You know, that's an interesting perspective, the way you frame that, with where you're actually rewarding the ones that have no skills and never had a job before, and not anybody that has skills. But with all that said, you know, being on the House Labor Committee, I have a front row seat to these types of bills. And these are always the contentious ones. These are the ones that, you know, we're always in a bigger committee room because we know there's going to be overflow crowds. They have another room or two with TV monitors, so everybody who's there to witness it or testify on behalf of these things, they can see it. So it's always a big draw. And this is always the night that you don't make any plans because you know you're going to go home at 10 o'clock. But really, the overwhelming argument in favor of minimum wage was that they can't raise their families. And the people that are
which is true.
Which is true. And I'm just thinking, what is the wage? What is the minimum wage that you can have to raise a family with 3 children and food and education and entertainment, whatever? I wouldn't think $30 an hour is enough. So it's really I think it's a flawed argument. The argument that resonates better with me as a business person and a business major in college is that
had to put that in.
Is that it's not a living wage. It's never been designed to be a living wage. I know I've heard it 1,000 times. I said it 10,000 times. It's not about that. It's about giving someone
it's an entry-level wage
to get into the workplace. So that's the part of the argument that holds more water for me. And I heard it from both sides. And my heart bleeds for them when they're testifying that they're a single mom with 3 children and they can't make it on $9 an hour. And my question was, could you make it at $10 an hour?
No, yeah.
Could you make it at $15 an hour? No. That's not what it's about. That's a different argument for a different day.
Yeah. You know, I think of minimum wage jobs as the jobs for young people.
Correct.
For our high schoolers, our teenagers. And we know that with this recession, we're just not creating those minimum entry-level jobs. We're just not. In fact, the unemployment rates for kids are just enormous. You know, they're around 20%, more than 20%. That means there's a huge loss of human potential there in their lives. They're sitting at home playing video games on the sofa because there's not a way for them to enter the workforce. to make a sandwich
Right.
or to serve a customer,
Right.
right? I mean, if you could make it more profitable, you'd have another company,
Correct.
another store, and you'd have 10 more
10 more
employees.
employees, and then 10 more again.
And that's 10 more kids who would get up off the sofa and learn what it's like to get a paycheck and to be productive.
Right.
You know, back 100 years ago when I was in college,
100 years,
I had an
okay.
economics professor, and he said exactly what you just said. He said, if you don't have a work ethic by age 18, you will be a bad worker your entire life. I mean, I don't have anything to justify whether that's true or not, but it makes a lot of sense. You're developing your work ethic. He said that these kids that are 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, that are sitting at home on their couches, and when I was in college, it was before all these video games were around, but he made that abundantly clear that you are developing your work ethic right now for the rest of your life.
Sure.
That should not go unsaid.
And, you know, your employees may not stay with you for a lifetime.
Correct.
But they develop a resume, because
Correct.
if they're good workers, you'll give them a reference.
Shows up on time, shows up every day, works hard, yeah.
Yeah. And so you can recommend them to that next employer
Correct.
who's going to pay them $12 an hour, and then the next one who's going to give them $15. I mean, you start young,
Correct.
developing a work ethic,
Right.
and you've talked about that a lot.
I've written
developing
plenty of
a work
letters
ethic.
for kids who are going off to move to Massachusetts College and need a letter for a good job. I've written plenty of good letters. So yes, it's more than worth it. And I believe minimum wage is also calculated at the fact that it's a hire two, get rid of one that didn't make it type of wage also. It's not that the minimum wage comes on. I just trained 2 people for 3 weeks, and both of them I had to let them go. They just did not care. So the cost of that is incredible. It was over $1,000 just to bring on 3 people, so now I'm behind the curve. So the entry-level wage is also, I always believe, to be calculated at a percentage of people you lose and keep. So now it's just, you better keep them all.
You know, I had also read that as your fixed cost, as you say, goes up, and now it's the minimum wage, that employers in the past used to do a lot of training. They'd get somebody with a lot of potential, a lot of initiative, and they would give them training and make them more valuable to them as employers. But with that comes wage increases, right? Then you want to keep them because somebody else wants them for those same skills. And now those fixed costs going up, that employers can't afford to give that extra training, right? They can't afford to send them maybe to CCRI to learn about chemicals, whatever, or mechanics. And we have an abundance of employees now who are not employed or who are underemployed. You can be pickier. You don't have to train from within. I know you prefer to, but you don't have to.
Right.
And you know why the fixed costs go up? Because the people who are packing the turkey, per se, the people who are whatever they're doing, everything at some point in time probably resonates from minimum wage workers. So I don't know if you've looked at, obvious to me in my business is what was called the dollar menu is now the value menu at, say, Wendy's, McDonald's, whatever. There's nothing on there for $1. And that's happened in the last 12, 18 months.
Yeah.
That's because of the cost of labor. It's all it is. So if you make another $1, but something goes up $1.50, are you making more money?
Well, that's true on the other end. What you're buying is more expensive. But I guess our point is, I care about the poor. I know you guys do too.
Yeah.
You want to see everybody have a good job. But raising the minimum wage is not the most effective way to get us there. Making our economy produce large numbers of diverse jobs from entry level all the way up to the executive. That's the way Rhode Island gets out of this.
Absolutely.
And the minimum wage just makes it worse.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
I am forever amazed at how little I know about government. Now, I started thinking of ways to improve the climate in Rhode Island for seniors. Not just because I am one, but I wanted to know what we could do to keep our talented seniors from moving out. The issue was driven home last week at the driving range at Green Valley Country Club in Portsmouth.
I bumped into acquaintances from a while back, stopped to chat about what was happening in their lives. Husband and wife, now fully retired, were very committed volunteers at their church and in lots of musical groups. But they announced they were selling their Rhode Island house and moving out of state. Now, these are very professional folks whose time and talent will no longer be available to us. Should we care? You bet. The impact of volunteers in any community is substantial. So substantial that our government has organized to get out to the volunteers. We have created the Corporation for National and Community Service, the CNCS. Our president has included $1.18 billion, that's $1 billion, in the 2016 budget to support the CNCS. That amount of money is going to AmeriCorps, Senior Corps, and the Social Innovation Fund. Now you may ask, raise your hand please if you have heard of any of these well thought out programs. Now the Social Innovation Fund is expected to, quote, improve lives, expand economic opportunities, bolster civic and faith-based organizations, engage millions, etc., etc. Right. I guess we will all be the better off having spent the $1 billion. Now, do we have any evidence that Rhode Island is in the mix here? Well, yes. We have our own bureaucracy in place. We call it the Serve Rhode Island. It represents the national program's goals. Since 1994, SERVE has secured $46 million in federal funds to help out Rhode Island nonprofits and, to use their language, government agencies. Wonder which agencies. It has an executive director and a proper staff to see that the national bureaucracy at CNCS gets its way. Now, if you go to www.serve Rhode Island, you get to see who qualifies to get volunteers on their staff in Rhode Island. So now I know our government has figured out that we can use volunteers in any number of ways, and that those states that don't get it right will fall behind the states that get a lot of volunteers to work. Using the CNCS's own analysis of state efforts, I discovered that once again, we here in Rhode Island are at the bottom of a list. The category is volunteer hours per resident, this between 2011 and 2013. And that statistic put us 49th with a 23.9 rate. Now, the top spot on this list of all states went to, you guessed it, Utah, with an inspiring 75.5 rate. Oh well. In Utah, 44.6% of residents volunteer. Here we get a disappointing 23.9. If you look at the dollar value of the volunteers the folks in Utah received, $3.5 billion of service contributed. In Rhode Island, we got $446 million from the 195,420 volunteers. Who should we be looking to attract into the volunteer world here? Well, right now the focus should be on the boomers. You know, the generation of 77 million Americans born between 1946 and 1964. To quote the executive summary of the CNCS's research brief on boomer volunteer retention and turnover, you like that one, the 77 million, quote, represent a potential boost to the volunteer world, not only because of the sheer size of the generation, but also because of its members' high level of education, wealth, and skills, unquote. What about Rhode Island's boomers? Actually, seniors have little or no incentive to stick around unless their grandchildren actually live nearby. I'm talking about the boomers that CNCS is talking about. There was a bill presented to the legislature that would have exempted all retirement pensions and Social Security from state income tax. Now, but what has happened to that bill? Now, if it is passed, I might think about sticking around unless I get a lot of money, or I had a lot of money, that the Rhode Island death tax would steal from my heirs. Need to change that law also. How about a Homestead Act to let us stay in our homes without property tax driving us out? And on it goes. Is there value in keeping the boomers here? Of course. maybe it's time to tell our so-called leaders to spend some time on that one. Thank you for watching, and God bless.